Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. We're gonna continue reading the book al-Ajwabah al-Jaliyatu fil Ahkam al-Hanbaliya, or the clear answer in Hanbali Rulings by Sheikh Musa bin Issa al-Qaddoomi rahimahullah. This is lesson number 29, where we will be discussing the communal or congregational prayer and some of the rulings related to the imamship. So let us begin. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. قال المؤلف رحمه الله نفع الله به وبعلومه وعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. So the Shaykh starts section on the Jama'ah or congregational salah with question number 63. Upon whom is salat with jama'ah or congregation wajib? Wajib meaning obligatory. And the author goes on, salat with jama'ah is wajib for the 5 times prayers for free men capable of doing jama'ah, whether they be resident or traveling. And what we're going to discuss here is also going to benefit us when we get to the section on the Jum'ah prayer. So, with regards to who it is an obligation for, it is not an obligation for those who are not legally responsible, such as a saghir or someone who has not reached the age of responsibility. So for such a person, the prayer itself is not obligatory, hence the communal prayer is not obligatory. The communal prayer likewise is not obligatory upon the woman, nor the hermaphrodite, nor is it obligatory upon those who have a valid legal excuse, which will be addressed in a coming lesson. So the author goes on to say, it's not considered a fard salah from a child that has not reached the age of discernment. This is what we've already explained. And he goes on, it is sunnah to pray jama'ah in a masjid. And this is an important point. It's not obligatory. So if you have enough people for the jama'ah, you can pray it, for example, in the house, in the home, or at work, or in the park, or anywhere where you're allowed to pray. And the author continues, it is sunnah for women to pray jama'ah when separate from men. Now regarding the definition of the jama'ah or the congregation, the smallest amount is an imam and a follower, meaning 2 people. The exception being the prayer for Jum'ah and Eid, which will be discussed in the section on the Jum'ah prayer, which has separate conditions, as you can understand. And when counting the people for the Jama'ah, it is permissible, or it counts to have a imam and a female follower. Likewise, it would count for a hermaphrodite follower. As we said, performing it in the masjid, meaning the congregational prayer, is always superior because the masjid is a place of sharaf or honor, and by doing so, we help to raise the symbol of al-Islam, and we also make the jama'ah larger. However, in Nayl by a-Taghlabi, he does mention a scenario where this could be an exception. So, if you could only perform the prayer in the masjid, or not only, but if you performed the prayer in the masjid and you would be by yourself, but you could perform it at home, and there you could be making a congregation, then it would be superior in that particular instance to pray in the home. And this may sound strange, but I have been to some so-called Islamic countries, and I've seen some very small congregations in the masjid. And Allahu Alam, maybe there are instances where one could be alone in the masjid. However, in the case that one could pray in a congregation in the masjid, albeit a small congregation, versus praying in a large congregation in the house, in this case, praying in the masjid would be better. Al-Buhuti mentions in Sharh al-Muntaha another interesting point where he says that it is disliked for the beautiful women to attend the congregation with men. And we can understand this being a congregation where it would all be together and you could see other people. But it would be permissible for other than them, for example, like an old woman. And that ruling also applies to other similar occasions, such as a majlis or a sitting of wa'ad or giving advice. Now I'm going to keep reading some of the additional points here that are from Nayl al-Marib by a-Taghlabi. These aren't, of course, in the book that we're reading, but I think they're useful points and we can go over them quickly, inshallah. So, regarding this congregation, we now want to talk about, catching the congregational prayer. So, this can be achieved if one makes the takbir, meaning the takbir of ihram, before the taslim of the imam. Or the first taslim of the imam, then he has caught the congregational prayer. And this is even if he hasn't joined the imam sitting, but he has made that takbir. Now we're talking about here, catching the actual prayer itself. But now with regards to catching the rak'ah, if one can catch the rak'ah if he joins into the rak'ah before the imam raises his head from the ruku', as long as he doesn't have any doubt that he's joined during the rak'ah or the ruku'. And it's not necessary that he catches that ruku' when the imam is in the state of pausing. In case he's joining when that pause is kind of coming to an end, the follower who's coming in late can just make a short pause himself and then continue following the imam. And finally, anytime that you're joining the prayer late, you should always be joining the prayer according to what the imam is doing. Meaning, for example, I see a lot of times in the masajid, people are joining during the tashahud, the sitting of the tashahud, and they remain standing. I don't know if this is a position in other madhahab, to be honest, but if you're following the Hanbali position, then one must join as he sees what the imam is doing. He should be doing the same thing, following the imam in what he's doing. Now, another good thing that is discussed here in Nayl is that in the case that the obligatory prayer is being established, no one can start a nafila supererogatory prayer. Not that he can't even start it, but meaning that if he starts it, it itself does not begin. That prayer, that nafila prayer, does not begin. Now this is different if one is already in the state of performing a nafila prayer when the obligatory prayer is being established. In that case, one would finish the nafila prayer but try to finish it quickly and make it khafif, meaning we don't need to do all of the sunnahs, we just want to finish the prayer so we can then join the fard prayer. Now we're going to go back to our book and we're starting a new section. So question number 64, and in case I forgot to mention in the beginning, we are on page 85 of the book. So question number 64, what are the actions of the imam done on behalf of the followers? Now there is something interesting to mention about this section, and I don't recall Shaykhuna Dr. Mustafa Hafadhullah mentioning this, but this is what I've mentioned from my own observation, and inshallah it's beneficial to you. But this is a section that you usually don't see it as a section in fiqh books. I mean, these issues are there, but they're usually not compiled together in a section. Now, as we mentioned, the book that we're reading, al-Ajwaba, is based on what? Dalil al-Talib. Now, this is a section in Dalil al-Talib. And do we remember who wrote Dalil al-Talib? It's Shaykh al-Imam Mar'i al-Karmi. Now, he's also wrote a book called Ghayat al-Muntaha, which is something that's even longer than al-Dalil. And interestingly enough, I do not recall seeing this section in that book. Although he's the same author of both books, it doesn't seem to be reflecting there. What is mentioned in this section is, however, mentioned in Muntaha al-Iradat, albeit in a, I think, slightly more abbreviated form. What's also interesting is that I've seen some versions of Dalil al-Talib that don't have this section, and some that do. And then if we look at some of the shuruh and the hawashi, I've also seen it missing. So, for example, in Manar al-Sabil, I haven't seen this section. In Hashiyat ibn Awad, I haven't seen this section. So, I guess what I'm trying to imply is that if you're looking for the additional reading on this section, probably your two best sources are going to be Nayl al-Marib and Sharh Muntaha al-Iradat by al-Buhuti. If you're looking for this as a section in other books, or as I said, even in some of the versions of Dalil, you may not find it. So anyways, let's begin reading this section. So as we said, the question, what are the actions of the imam done on behalf of the followers? And the author replies, the imam is responsible on behalf of the followers for 8 things. Let's just read them all and then we'll maybe look at each one. A. Qira'ah or recitation. B. Sujood of forgetfulness. C. Sujood of tilawat or recitation. D. Sutra, meaning the barrier, to be in front of him, because the sutra of the imam is a sutra for those praying behind him. E. Dua al-Qunut. F. The first tashahhud. If the follower joined after the first rak'ah in a 4 rak'ah salah. G. To say Sami Allahu liman hamida, Allah has heard the one who praises him. And H. Saying ملء السماوات وملء الأرض وملء ما شئت من شيء بعد. This is the dua or the supplication which can be read after coming out of the ruku'. So from the Hanbali perspective, we understand that the recitation of the imam is done on behalf of the follower, according to what Allah Ta'ala has said in Surah Al-A'raf, verse 204, وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَانصِتُوا. So if the Quran is read, then listen and be silent. And also what was mentioned in the hadith of Abi Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, وَإِذَا قَرَأَ فَأَنصِتُوا, which is narrated by the 5 except Tirmidhi. And also the hadith مَنْ كَانَ لَهُ إِمَامٌ فَقِرَاءَةُ الْإِمَامِ لَهُ قِرَاءَةٌ. So he who has an imam, his imam, the recitation of his imam is his recitation, which is narrated by Sa'id and Ahmed in his Masa'il of his son Abdullah in ad-Darqutni, and al-Buhuti mentions in Sharh Muntaha. And if this is a mursal report, mursal meaning a report that the companion is cut out, so this means that the tabi'i or the follower is reciting from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we're not in a hadith science course, so I mean that's just a quick definition in case you're not familiar with the term. But the point is that Imam al-Buhuti, he says that even if this is a mursal report, then according to us it's evidence. Now regarding the prostration of recitation, if we look at how this is explained in al-Dalil, we will see that he has it as 2 different points. And here in al-Ajwaba it is mentioned 1 time, so we can understand that he has combined both meanings. And the 2 meanings that are combined here are that first we're talking about a scenario where there is a prayer, and we can understand this as being a silent prayer, because in that case the follower would be reciting. But in the case that the follower is reciting a verse that is a verse of prostration, even if his imam didn't prostrate, which of course he wouldn't prostrate, then it's covered for him. Likewise, in the scenario that the imam is reading a verse of prostration in a silent prayer, then of course the imam is reading it silently, and then he would prostrate. And it is mentioned here in the Nayl al-Marib that in that situation the follower would have a choice to either also prostrate or not to prostrate. Regarding the dua of al-Qunut, I think people are familiar with this, but I mean, this is just affirming that yes, when the imam is reading dua al-Qunut, the follower does not read it, and he doesn't say anything except for ameen. Now there is this point about the first tashahhud. If the follower joined after the first rak'ah in a 4 rak'ah prayer. Now, as I told you, there is a shortage of explanation of this part of the book. There's a shortage of explanations. So, what I was reading in my notes from Shaykhuna Dr. Mustafa was in fact a little bit different as far as what I've seen in some of the commentaries that exist. So I don't know how to best explain it, but it has to do with the haikal, or the form of the prayer itself, because in the case that one comes late, and as we said here, we're mentioning specifically someone coming 1 rak'ah late in a 4 rak'ah prayer. You know, when you're coming in that way, the prayer itself can be seen as one. I mean, for example, if we're praying like a dhuhr, okay, everyone is praying dhuhr, but for, let's say I've come late, I'm behind the imam is in his 2nd rak'ah and I'm starting my 1st. So it's as if there are 2 different prayers in this prayer. Now my prayer as someone who's coming late has a slightly different form than what the imam himself is praying. Now conventionally, one would only make the tashahhud after completing 2 units, 2 rak'ah. Or in the case where it's a witr prayer, it would be the one at the end, or the ending of any prayer in general. I mean, this is when we would do the tashahhud. So now in the 4 rak'ah prayer, when you've come in the 2nd rak'ah, and then the imam is going into the tashahhud and the julus and the tashahhud, I mean, it's like your tashahhud is off because you haven't completed the 2 units, but at the same time you have to follow the imam. So I mean, this is kind of how Shaykhana Dr. Mustafa had explained it, but I mean even more briefly, basically saying that it's like the last tashahhud of the imam is in fact the latecomer's first tashahhud, because as we said, I mean, it's kind of like that. As a unit, it hasn't happened yet. I mean, you're just following the imam. And in this case, when you're coming in the 2nd rak'ah of a 4 rak'ah prayer, then you're still adding the other rak'ah, which then has a so-called 3rd tashahhud. But I mean, this extra rak'ah that you're praying is kind of joining with the first one that you've already prayed, and that's why you're doing the julus again. Now if you think about this and you contrast it with al-Marib, which I think this is now, you might understand why he's mentioning about the 4 unit prayer. But if you've come in the 2nd rak'ah of al-Marib, then you're doing tashahhud, and then you're only praying 1 additional rak'ah, and then you're doing another tashahhud. So now that tashahhud is kind of like fulfilling the required form of a tashahhud, because you've now prayed 2 rak'ah, albeit you've come late, but you're like still in the form of the prayer. And then you're praying 1 more, and whether you think about it as making up the first rak'ah or just concluding it, either way you're praying a tashahhud, because now the prayer is over. So I don't know if I've explained it well or I've only like confused you more, but the point is that when I was rereading this, it was very confusing, and my notes, it wasn't like they weren't giving me a satisfactory explanation. So I did try to look. I think in Al-Muntaha it's kind of slightly addressed, although I don't know if it's addressed any better. It's addressed more than what we have in, for example, Nayl and al-Marib. But this is what I've understand it. Inshallah, it's correct. And if you didn't understand it, the point is it's not necessary that you understand it, because either way, when you're coming into a prayer late, you know how to complete the prayer, and you will complete the prayer. This is just an explanation of what is happening in that case where you have essentially an extra tashahhud, and the first tashahhud is coming like out of form, meaning after just one rak'ah as a first tashahhud of a prayer that's more than 2 rak'ah. So inshallah that makes sense. As I said, if it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Now I'm just going to go over a few other random points from different books that might be useful. I hope I'm not putting too much stuff out here, but one useful point that al-Buhuti mentions in Sharh al-Muntaha is that when you are joining a prayer late, and here it's any kind of late, don't get confused with the point we're just talking about, coming in the second rak'ah of a 4 rak'ah. Now just when you're coming late for any 4-unit prayer or maghrib, in the last prayer, the last rak'ah, the imam is going to sit in the tawarak position. And if you forget what this is, you can go back on to the lesson of the description of the prayer or the sunnahs of the prayer. In this case, the follower, who we said has come late, would also be sitting in the tawarak position, and we're doing this, of course, in the final tashahhud of the prayer, and we're talking about the prayer of the imam. So the main prayer that you've come late to. So the imam is now in the final tashahhud, which is a second tashahhud, sitting in tawarak. The follower in this instance would also then sit in the tawarak position. Now in a audible prayer, it is also sunnah for the follower to read the opening supplication, Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. I think we've already covered that. And to also do the ta'awud, saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. As we said, this is in the audible prayer. Likewise, in the audible prayer, it is also sunnah for the follower to read Surah Al-Fatiha in the silence of the imam, meaning silence after he himself is reading Al-Fatiha, which it's sunnah for him to make that silence there. And also a second surah, if a second surah is legislated, meaning of a first or second rak'ah of the prayer. And as we said, this is for a audible prayer. And al-Buhuti clarifies in Sharh al-Muntaha that all of these things are also sunnah for the follower to do in a non-audible prayer, such as dhuhr. And likewise, the non-audible portion of an audible prayer, such as the third, or we could also say final, whichever way you like to think of it, rak'ah of al-Maghrib, or the final 2 or third and fourth rak'ahs of al-Isha. So we're going to conclude here today. I hope I haven't gone on too many tangents. The next lesson we're going to complete discussing some of these rulings related to the imamship, and probably cover the section on those who are excused from the Jum'ah or Jama'ah or congregational prayer. As always, please don't forget us in your dua. Do not forget our shaykhs, and do not forget about our brothers and sisters, some of whom are really suffering, going through great trials and tribulations without any assistance from us. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.